Anyway, I just wanted to very quickly thank the previous speakers for their lovely sort of journey through the garden and flowers and the outdoors. And it was very lovely, very serene. In moving to Mariette, we are kind of jumping into hardscaping of all kinds. And I haven't done, I mean, I could, but not in this talk. And then I found your analysis of sort of masculine, feminine architecture, gardens being perhaps maybe more feminine, very interesting, because one could apply the same thing to architecture and tapestry, or an artist using wool. But I'm not doing that. My focus is more on, I suppose, introducing the artist and I suppose underlining what I think is her importance as a modernist. So that involves introducing you to, anyway, the scope of her career and because she was so very prolific. So I'll just jump in. So Mariette Rousseau-Vermette, artist, mentor, and curator, was a pioneer of modernist textile art. At the time of her death in 2006, she had produced over 640 tapestries for exhibitions, public spaces, private residences, theaters, and pavilions at Expo 67 and Expo 70. Critically acclaimed in her lifetime, and the recipient of prizes and honors that included the Officer of the Order of Canada, she created over 100 public works in collaboration with architects. In the late 1970s and 80s, she revolutionized the fiber arts teaching at the Banff Centre and also curated an exhibition of contemporary Canadian textile art for the opening of the Barbican Centre in London, England. Rousseau-Vermette, who I will now refer to as Mariette, just for brevity, was born in 1926 in Trois-Pistoles, Quebec. Enchanted as a child with the medium of wool, she began weaving at the age of 12. In 1944, she enrolled at the École des Beaux-Arts de Québec in a 4-year program for professional training as an artist and a weaver. Among her teachers, the painter Jean Dallaire introduced her to international modernism and also to the work of Jean Leussat, the painter responsible for the revival of post-war tapestry in Europe. In this slide, you see pages from her sample books from the Atelier du Tissage, where she excelled at the rigors of weaving. Following her graduation in 1948, Mariette headed to San Francisco to study in the studio of the famed American textile designer Dorothy Liebes. An innovative colorist and successful businesswoman, Liebes' collaborations with architects such as Frank Lloyd Wright inspired Mariette's own path as an artist. In 1949, Mariette returned to Montreal and met the painter and ceramist Claude Vermette. He introduced her to Paul-Émile Bourgeois and the Automatistes, whose growing commitment to interdisciplinarity and the integration of art into architecture was inspiring. Mariette's travels with Claude to Italy and encounters with architect Gio Ponti and sculptor Fausto Melotti consolidated their commitments to public art. In 1952, Claude and Mariette married and settled in Saint-Adèle, north of Montreal. And art was always part of the marriage. They had their own studios, and Mariette, despite having to care for children, was certainly given time to pursue her own career. In 1956, Mariette began collaborations with Fernand Leduc and some plasticien artists, whose manifesto stressed the importance of integrating abstract art into urban life through architecture. For the tapestry on the left, Leduc sought Mariette's weaving skills because the initial reaction to his abstract painting had been hostile. Leduc believed that if the same compositions could be translated into the warm medium of wool, they would be made more appealing to the public. And indeed, it worked. In 1958, for the work on the right, Jean-Paul Mousseau, in his preoccupations with light and new materials, invited Mariette to weave 2 tapestries inspired by his Spectrum series of drawings. Guido Molinari also collaborated with Mariette. Her tapestry based on one of his paintings is on the far right. You'll see it right there. Okay. In 1959, the National Gallery of Canada invited Mariette and Micheline Beauchemin to participate in a traveling exhibition. While the majority of Mariette's tapestries were those resulting from collaborations with other artists, the exhibition also featured this work and 2 others of her own invention. From this time forward, she would design all her own work. This was a critical, emancipating leap as she forged a new identity as an artist weaver, asserting a creative independence that would launch a new, exciting body of work in the 1960s. The 1960 election of Quebec's Liberal Premier Jean Lesage marked the beginning of a quiet revolution and a social and political climate that supported modernist abstract art as a tool for Quebec identity in the modernization of Quebec society. Indeed, at the opening of Rousseau and Mariette's exhibition in 1961 at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, reviewers noted the supportive presence of Lesage and the Minister of Culture, Georges-Émile Lepalme. The exhibition featured Mousseau's new light and resin sculptures and 7 of Mariette's tapestries characterized by gradations of seasonal light. Her largest work to date, Hiver Canadien, I'm sorry the dimensions aren't there, a couple meters high, about 5 meters wide, is pictured on the back wall. It would be selected in 1962 for the first International Biennial of Tapestry in Lausanne, Switzerland, thus launching Mariette's national and international career. Mariette's success in Lausanne drew the attention of the Quebec press and fostered discussions about art and craft. In the article shown on the slide, the writer concluded that Mariette distinguished herself as an artist due to her professionalism, formal education, decision to make colorful abstract art on a large scale, and the desire to seek architectural commissions. And that's a tapestry in the background as well. In the 1960s, Mariette's explorations of light varied from subtle tonal effects, as we saw in Hiver Canadien, to clear, dramatic colors and graphic crenellated forms. This tapestry, Ablaze, was inspired by the burning embers of a fire, but it was originally titled Right, after the architect, and depicts a cantilevering of color, red into black, and vice versa. It would later serve as her design for the Eisenhower Theater curtain at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. With the 60s building boom, Mariette's work became increasingly attractive to architects seeking the natural materials, color and warmth of her tapestries in the cool glass, steel, and concrete interiors of their buildings. Architects were also encouraged by the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, whose magazine provided lists of artists, including Mariette, who were experienced in creating art for architecture. Oh, that was my text for that. Other tapestries from the mid-1960s paid homage to Mariette's admiration for the American abstract expressionist Mark Rothko, whose powerful emotional paintings would have a lifelong impact on the artist. Mariette's restrained and uncluttered visual aesthetic appealed to many modernist architects who had been trained according to Bauhaus principles at the McGill School of Architecture. For Ottawa's new National Art Centre, architect Fred Lebensold, who taught at McGill, selected the artists to compete for the theater and opera commissions. This painterly maquette won Mariette the commission for the theater curtain, and Micheline Beauchemin won the commission for the opera. Fred Lebensold was also the chief architect for the theaters at Montreal's Place des Arts, where Mariette was selected to design the curtain for the Théâtre Maisonneuve. In contrast to the Ottawa curtain with its large, simple masses of color, this curtain was composed of narrow vertical bands and horizontal blocks. For Expo 67, Mariette received commissions for 2 of the provincial pavilions, where the displays of her bold, abstract tapestries asserted the progressive nature of French-Canadian identity. In addition to 8 other works for public spaces, she created 2 tapestries for Moshe Safdie's residential complex, Habitat 67. This one in the apartment belonging to photographer Yosef Karsh. Mariette's renown extended beyond the Montreal area. This work, Éclat de Joie, now displayed in the Simons department store in the Galerie d'Anjou in Montreal, was originally commissioned by Quebec architect Charles Tremblay for the Simons family residence in Quebec City. In the late 60s, Mariette began to weave thick cables of unspun wool, as well as Canadian fur, into her tapestries, exploring texture, sculptural relief, and light effects, and maybe kind of upping the Canadian identity through her materials. This wall-sized work, created for Exposition Environnement, was installed in the lobby of Montreal's Place Bonaventure to promote the integration of art into architecture. So Mariette was very, very visible in Montreal in the 1960s. In the late 60s, Mariette's flourishing reputation also drew the attention of Arthur Erickson and Jeffrey Massey for the interior of their Macmillan Bladel building in Vancouver. There she installed 2 large tapestries that evoked the dappled light of the forest, so appropriate for a company that was taking the forest down. Erickson wrote, "I found the simplicity of her work blended perfectly with the simple structural expression of the building." Erickson would later commission Mariette to collaborate on works for Roy Thompson Hall and the Canadian Chancery in Washington, D.C. By the close of the 60s, with 50 public works to her credit, Mariette's status as a successful artist weaver and one of Canada's leading modernists was firmly established. In the decades that followed, she would receive another 65 commissions for public art from across Canada, as well as in the United States. In the 70s, she invented her mobile walls, as we see here, works composed of wool-covered aluminum tubes enhanced with optical fiber. Mariette's story has now been lost to the chronicles of Canadian art, not because of her gender, but because of her medium. Let's hope that discussions such as these will bring renewed appreciation for this great modernist. Thank you.